Let's talk about Ecuador. This country in South America in the last 5 years has suffered a significant rise in gang violence and drug warfare. And thankfully, since 2018, the Attorney General has been fighting back against this high-level corruption. Her name is Diana Salazar, and this is her story. Let's start with a brief history of Ecuador, bringing you up to the present day and how Diana Salazar is fighting against corruption at the highest levels of her government. Okay. All the way back to the 15th century, the Incan Empire begins to expand into Ecuador and takes over what is the land of previous indigenous tribes like the Kitukara and the Cañari peoples. They force them to speak their language, and it's really quite a brutal colonization process. Ecuador is one of the most beautiful places in the whole world. It's extremely famous for, one, being having the highest rate of biodiversity and endemic species per unit area. That means animals that you'll only find there. And second, for having the gateway to the Galapagos Islands, which you'll probably know from Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. He was aboard his HMS Beagle and landed there and realized through finches and through Galapagos turtles the theory of evolution, which then he made into his very famous book On the Origin of Species in 1859. Okay. So in 1532, the Spanish arrive and they begin conquering the area. Some of the original indigenous peoples actually support the Spanish occupation so that they can get rid of their newly found oppressors in the Incan Empire. So after a while, of course, the Spanish rule is not very good either, and they have forced labor systems, they spread European diseases, they devastate a lot of these indigenous populations. Interestingly, Spain has a very hierarchical racial structure where you have people called peninsulares. These are the people who were born in Spain. They have the most power and the most authority. Then you have people who are Spanish by origin, but were born in South America. That makes them a criollo, and this means that they're going to face pretty significant discrimination despite having this European ancestry. Then there are other layers. So if you have like 1/4 of your ancestry is indigenous, you're going to have a specific designation and a specific rank in your society. Okay. When does this all change? When does the new structure come in? It happens because of Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1808, he is taking over all of Europe. He's becoming an authoritarian dictator and an imperialist, and he puts in his own brother as the king of Spain. Now, all of these loyal Spaniards, including the criollos and including the peninsulares, they're not very happy about this, and they don't consider it to be a legitimate leader. So they get some level of independence. When Spain finally gets its territory back and says, well, we're the king, we've got the king again in the correct place, you should be ruled under us. The South American countries across that region, actually, under a guy called Bolivar, decide that actually, no, they should fight a war of independence. They do, and eventually they gain some political independence and their own nation. By 1830, Ecuador separates from Gran Colombia, becomes an independent republic, and then you see a period, unfortunately, of terrible power struggles, instability, and assassinations. Two famous ones, Gabriel Garcia Moreno, president from 1861 basically to 1875 with a break in the middle. He had a bunch of conservative Catholic policies, and he is killed with a machete in 1875. Eloy Alfaro, 1895 to 1911, he does a bunch of things like secularizing education, reducing church's influence. He too is assassinated and then dragged through the cobblestone streets on the back of a horse in his death to show, the power of this assassination. So this really carries on throughout the 20th century as well. And only after 7 years of military rule, finally in 1979, do we enter the modern period of Ecuadorian history, which is relatively democratic, but it has its issues. Unfortunately, in 2016, something happens in South America that drastically changes Ecuador's status as one of the most peaceful, prosperous, and beautiful touristic nations in all of South America. And that is that in 2016, FARC, which is the Colombian gang that basically runs so many drugs, they finally shut down. And they leave a power vacuum for cocaine trafficking. Now, Colombia directly borders Ecuador. And the president at the time, Rafael Correa, who's between 2007 to 2017, while he is improving some infrastructure, it's pretty clear that he is not cracking down on this rise of drug cartels operating in Ecuador. In fact, he shuts down an American base, which is off the coast, which was tracking a lot of FARC activity, and therefore allows them to start trafficking through Ecuador. Ecuador also sells a lot of bananas. So you can imagine all of these crates, millions of crates of bananas being sent off. It's pretty easy to fit cocaine in those packages. So it becomes a key zone for cocaine trafficking and drug activity. This means that the murder rate has drastically increased, and so has just the danger for ordinary citizens. You can't really go outside. You can't really go walking on the street. There were 8,000 murders in 2024, violent murders, and it's just not a safe or good place to be. In that context, a new government comes in and introduces Diana Salazar as the Attorney General, the highest sort of prosecutor in the land, and she starts aggressively targeting these things. In 2022, we get a really crazy breakthrough. There is a drug financier, that is someone who is basically, giving money to cartels and organizing trades. He's in prison and he's murdered in prison for obviously gang-related activities, and they find his phone and they start looking through his phone and they find in these encrypted messages thousands of messages to judges and police. They're giving money to judges and police to release traffickers. They gave $250,000 to a judge to free the former vice president, Jorge Glass, who was actually prosecuted also by Diana Salazar for his role in the FIFA corruption scandal of 2015. They'd been taking millions of dollars in order to grease the wheels in the FIFA system as well. That's like organized soccer, right? So there's also a claim that the guy who was in a cell with this guy whose phone was eventually looked at, he basically said that Norero spoke with Correa, the previous president, from prison. So that's all being investigated. So since Salazar has come into power and has found all of this and is like investigating everything, she's charged 76 individuals, including people at the very top, legislators, judges, police. There's been 44 convictions with 24 defendants, all just like purely admitting guilt and cooperating for reduced sentences. Interestingly, in trying to obstruct her, Correa, who's no longer the president, he has been trying to prevent her achieving these things. He will post, if he knows that there's a raid going on, he'll post on Twitter the day before. He will try to discredit everything she does. In fact, they've even tried to impeach her and mocked her most recent pregnancy as a show pregnancy, saying that it was fake and just an attempt to get out of politics for a little bit. She then had a kid, and of course, this didn't go through because it was entirely real. Okay? They have also accused her of being extremely biased, saying that she's only attacking like left-wing people. And Correa, the ex-president, has said, look, she's really just a shill for big business, trying to just make it easier for certain businesses and people to operate freely. And there's some small evidence of that. There was something she said where she said she wasn't going to prosecute someone until after an election. So there's a chance that she is like biased in that way. However, there's also evidence that she has tried to prosecute people on both sides of the political aisle. So how has this actually affected Ecuador? It's not quite clear yet. It's not clear whether this is actually solving the problem. And in fact, it's probably not, because the problem runs extremely deep. In fact, if you look, there was a recent incident where one of the highest drug cartel members in a prison was basically was discovered to have escaped somehow. And also, this was during the same period where masked gunmen ran into a TV studio, took over the TV studio, and published like crazy ideological stuff through the news service. So there's an upcoming election now in 2025 on April 13th, and that will basically decide, depending on who gets into power, whether it's Correa's protege or someone else, whether her investigations will continue, and probably what actually happens to Ecuador in the coming years. So let's keep our eyes open, watching whether Ecuador can try to prevent its slip slide into becoming a state like Mexico, where cartels basically operate as an entire para-state with its own military. She says, Diana Salazar, to close out the session, impunity cannot last forever, which really shows she's committed to enforcing justice. Let's see if she can actually achieve it.